The morning sun cast long shadows over the cemetery as David Calloway approached his son's grave. In his hands, he held a bouquet of vibrant flowers, but to him, they felt as meaningless as the glittering trophies displayed in the grand mansion he had come to despise. Each step felt heavy, burdened with years of unresolved grief and guilt. For a decade, he had made this pilgrimage every Sunday, seeking a connection to his son, Michael, and finding only the emptiness left in the wake of tragedy. As David set the flowers gently at the base of the headstone, he whispered a familiar greeting. "Hey, Michael. It's Dad." His voice cracked, the weight of his sorrow spilling over. The man who had once commanded boardrooms now found himself lost amid the gravestones, his world comprised of silence and shadows. The glorious life he had built seemed like a distant memory, one overshadowed by the ever-present ache of loss. He closed his eyes, trying to envision Michael's face, the way he would light up with laughter during their fishing trips, or how he could always find new adventures in a simple backyard. But the memories had faded with time, leaving behind fragments of joy intertwined with profound sadness. Just when he thought he had reached the depths of his grief, he felt a pang of longing for the moments they would never share, a father and son growing together, building a life. Glancing around, David inhaled deeply, letting the scent of fresh earth fill his lungs. That's when he noticed a figure standing nearby. A boy no older than 12. His small frame silhouetted against the morning sun. David's heart skipped a beat. What was a child doing in this quiet place? The boy looked intent, his posture stiff, as if lost in thought. Before David could approach, the boy went down on one knee. His head bowed toward Michael's headstone. David's curiosity piqued. What connection did this boy have with his son? Slowly he moved closer, intent on discovering the truth, afraid that if he made a sound, the boy would vanish like a ghost from a nightmare. From a distance, David watched as the boy placed a small wild bouquet, much different from the formal arrangement he had just laid down, at the base of the grave. The gesture was tender, filled with a kind of sincerity David hadn't expected to witness here. It struck him as odd yet familiar. His heart raced as he observed the boy whispering softly, his lips moving in an earnest murmur that carried with it a pain David could almost sense. Compelled by an overwhelming urge to understand, David finally called out, his voice breaking the stillness. "Hey, what are you doing here?" The boy's body stiffened. He straightened up suddenly, his face turning pale. Their gazes locked, and David saw fear flicker in the boy's dark eyes. Was it surprise? Alarm? He couldn't tell. Before David could utter another word, the boy turned and sprinted away, dashing through the rows of headstones with the speed of a startled deer. "Wait!" David shouted, his heart pounding in his chest. He took off after the boy, his legs aching from the pursuit but his determination propelling him forward. "Stop!" But the boy was quick, disappearing into the trees that bordered the cemetery before David could reach him. Panting heavily, David came to a halt, surveying the surrounding area as he felt a rush of conflicting emotions. Frustration, confusion, and an odd sense of loss, as if he had chased something important that had slipped through his fingers. Everything about the boy felt hauntingly familiar. His hair, the shape of his face. David couldn't shake the feeling that this boy was somehow tied to Michael, a piece of a puzzle he had never expected to find. What drew him here? Who was he? With his mind racing, David trudged back toward Michael's grave, his heart a storm of questions. He dropped to his knees beside the headstone, letting frustration rise. What is this? Who was he? Tears filled his eyes, reflecting the storm brewing inside him. That evening, as David sat in his lavish but lonely mansion, he replayed the scene over and over in his mind. The boy's image lingered in his thoughts, a specter of a past he couldn't touch. Sleep eluded him. His mind spun with a million possibilities. Was the boy somehow connected to Michael? Could he be a distant relative? A friend from school? The lack of answers gnawed at his insides. He grabbed his phone, fingers trembling as he sent a message to Greg, his trusted investigator. "Find this boy. I need to know who he is." Each second felt like an eternity, the silence of the mansion closing in around him, amplifying the ache in his heart. Late into the night, David sat in the dim light of his study, tapping his fingers impatiently against the desk, the shadows elongating around him. The opulence of his surroundings felt like a gilded cage, trapping him in a world devoid of love and laughter. What would it take to piece together this fragment of his son's life? The thought of finding even a shred of connection to Michael filled him with determination, a hope that had been missing for far too long. A familiar voice broke through his reverie the next morning, just as the sun began to rise. "David, it's Greg," came the voice on the other end of the line. "Did you find him?" David asked, his heart racing in anticipation. "I have some information," Greg replied. "The boy's name is Ethan. He lives with his mother in a small town about 40 minutes away. What's peculiar is that he visits the cemetery regularly, always alone." Ethan. The name rolled around David's mind, igniting a flicker of hope and a mounted sense of urgency. "What do you know about them? Is there more?" Greg hesitated for a moment before continuing. "They moved there a few years ago. From what I gathered, it seems like they keep to themselves. But there's more, David. The boy. He looks just like Michael." David felt a chill run down his spine. What did this mean? Suddenly, the boy's frantic flight from the cemetery made sense. He was afraid, and if he looked like Michael, it was likely that the weight of his lineage pressed heavily upon him. "Get me an address," David rushed, his voice tinged with urgency as his mind reeled with possibilities. "I need to meet them." As he hung up the phone, determination surged within him. The city skyline rose outside his windows, but they felt like prison bars, locking him away from the family he would fight to rebuild. Michael had been lost to him due to unspoken words and missed chances. Now here was a chance, however unexpected, to connect. David's heart pulsed with anticipation. He had to descend back into the world of the living, and perhaps even reconcile with the details of a life steeped in absence. He was a man on a mission now, with an unwavering sense that this boy held the missing pieces of his broken legacy. With a deep breath, he plunged into the day, igniting a flicker of hope that perhaps, just perhaps, the tangled threads of fate were guiding him toward a new beginning shaped by bittersweet memories, memories that now held the promise of healing. Michael would not only be a wound but also the catalyst for reuniting a family long hidden in the shadows of grief. And so, David Calloway's journey was just beginning, a path marked by loss, discovery, and the glimmer of a hope he had once believed unobtainable. Little did he know, the revelations awaiting him would irrevocably alter the course of his life, unveiling a truth that had been woven into the very fabric of his existence. The boy from the cemetery, Ethan, held the key to a future David never knew he needed. As he drove toward the small town with a mix of anxiety and hope, David felt a sense of purpose ignite within. He was about to reclaim a lost piece of his life. This chapter in his life was not closing. It was only just beginning. As David drove toward the small town, the weight of anticipation settled in the pit of his stomach. He could hardly fathom what was about to unfold. At the forefront of his thoughts was the image of Ethan, the young boy with the striking resemblance to his son. Each mile seemed to stretch into infinity, filled with unspoken words and unanswered questions. Who was Ethan? How did he come to be at Michael's grave? When he finally arrived, the town revealed itself to be quaint and picturesque, a stark contrast to the opulence he was used to. The small streets were lined with old trees, their branches swaying gently in the soft breeze. As David navigated the winding road, he caught glimpses of children playing in yards and families gathered for picnics. For a brief moment, he felt a pang of jealousy. This was the life he never got to share with Michael. He pulled up to a modest two-story house with faded blue paint and a small, unkempt garden. An unease settled in his chest as he parked, his heart racing with each hesitation of his hand on the door handle. What if they didn't want to see him? What if he was intruding into a world where he no longer belonged? Taking a deep breath, he stepped out of the car, the crunch of gravel beneath his feet grounding him in the moment. He approached the front door, his heart pounding in sync with the rhythm of his footsteps. With a shaky hand, he knocked softly, then stepped back, the sound resonating like thunder in the quiet afternoon. A moment later, the door creaked open, revealing Sarah, Ethan's mother, with a mix of surprise and caution etched across her face. Her dark hair framed her face in loose waves, and her weary eyes mirrored the history of struggle she had endured. In that instant, David could see the walls she had built. It would take more than a simple introduction to knock them down. "Mr. Calloway?" she asked hesitantly, her tone laced with uncertainty. "Yes, that's me." David swallowed, trying to mask the torrent of emotions swirling within. "I hope I'm not intruding. I'm looking for Ethan." Her eyes narrowed slightly, as if measuring his intentions. "He's in the backyard," she replied, stepping aside and allowing him in. "But I'm not sure what you want with him. He's still processing everything." David could feel the heaviness in her words, the caution woven into them. He entered the modest living space adorned with homemade decorations and fading photographs. Every intricate detail told a story, stitched together from joy and hardship. David's eyes landed on one particular picture, a little boy laughing, his dark hair tousled, with a sparkle in his eye that mirrored Michael's. As Sarah led him toward the backyard, David's heart raced. He could hear laughter and the sound of a ball bouncing on the ground. It felt like a distant echo of a life he could have shared with Michael, a life that had been brutally snatched away. They stepped outside and there was Ethan, his back turned to them, engrossed in a game with a neighbor's child. "Ethan," Sarah called softly, and the boy turned, his eyes widening in surprise as he spotted David. "Mr. Calloway," he managed, his gaze darting nervously between his mother and David. "Ethan," David said, forcing a warm smile, trying to bridge the unfamiliar gap between them. "It's good to finally meet you." The boy looked apprehensive, his small frame tense. "Why are you here?" he asked, his voice small yet brave. David crouched down to be at eye level with Ethan, the distance between them feeling insurmountable. "I wanted to talk to you, to get to know you," he replied, sincerity lacing every word. "You remind me so much of your father. Of Michael." At the mention of Michael, Ethan's expression shifted from suspicion to confusion, the mix of emotions painting across his face like a turbulent canvas. For a moment, David lingered in the depths of the boy's eyes, searching for some sign of recognition, some acknowledgement of shared lineage. "Mom always said that I should never talk about my dad," Ethan finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper, and it broke David's heart to hear that delicate truth. "She said it's complicated." David nodded, understanding the weight of those words all too well. He glanced at Sarah, who was now standing a few steps back, her face a mask of apprehension. "I know it's complicated, but I'm here to listen if you want to share," he urged gently. Ethan was silent for a moment, and the children he had been playing with wandered back to their own home, leaving an echoing quietness between them. Finally, he stepped a little closer, his curiosity piqued but still guarded. "Why did you visit his grave?" David took a deep breath, feeling the fabric of their reality begin to weave together. "I visit Michael every week. I just want him to know that I'm still here for him. Even though he's gone, I still love him. And I want to love you too." The boy studied him with a mix of skepticism and interest. "Did you know he had me?" David's heart twisted painfully at the innocent question. "No," he confessed, his voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't. I wish I had. But knowing you exist is a gift, Ethan. It means I still have a part of him with me." Tears welled in Ethan's eyes, but he stubbornly blinked them away. "I'm just scared. Everyone says I look like him, but it feels like I don't belong anywhere. Sometimes I don't want to be like him. What if I make the same mistakes?" The frank honesty echoed in the air, and David felt a profound sadness wash over him. This child, so full of potential, feared the same shadows Michael had battled, You're your own person, Ethan, David replied, struggling to find the right words. You can create your own life. You don't have to follow in anyone's footsteps unless you want to. There was a long moment of silence, during which David could feel the barrier between them beginning to crack. Can I ask you something? Ethan ventured, his voice wavering slightly. Of course, David encouraged. Why didn't you take care of him? The question struck like lightning, ripping through David's defenses. He stared at the ground, guilt washing over him. I was lost, I suppose. I had my own battles to fight, and I failed to be there for him when he needed me most. I didn't know about you, but now I want to make things right. I want to be a part of your life if you'll let me. He stepped forward again, and slowly, Ethan reached for his hand. The small gesture felt monumental, layered with unspoken promises and nascent connections. In the following weeks, David visited often, transforming that modest backyard into a playground of possibilities filled with laughter, stories, and an unfolding bond with Ethan. He often found himself enveloped in the boy's laughter, feeling as though Michael was still present amidst the joy. But beneath their newfound camaraderie lay the ever-thickening shroud of unanswered questions. Why had Sarah never mentioned the full truth? What secrets lingered just beneath the surface? Each day became a delicate dance of connection and silence, and with each passing moment, David felt himself getting pulled deeper into their world. As they shared popcorn while watching movies or worked together to plant a small vegetable garden, David began to see glimpses of Michael in the way Ethan smiled, the way he pondered life's funny twists. Yet, the shadows of secrets whispered around them, promising that this journey would not be without its challenges. And then, one day, as David prepared to leave after a joyful afternoon, Ethan turned to him, his expression suddenly serious. Mr. Calloway, I want to know more about my dad. Can you tell me about him? The question hung in the air, echoing against the walls of David's heart. Could he impart the truth, the full spectrum of a life that was both beautiful and full of regrets? He could feel the gravity of the moment. It was time to unravel the threads of Michael's past, twists, turns and all, that lay in wait within the recesses of their memories. With a resolute nod, David smiled down at Ethan, knowing this was a pivotal step forward. Yes, Ethan, I can tell you about him. And I promise to share everything I can. As he spoke, the shadows of their past began to shift, preparing to unveil long-hidden truths. The journey had only just begun, and David could feel the weight of secrets straining at the seams, eager to burst forth and reshape their lives forever. With every word he would soon share, they would learn how entwined they truly were and what it would take to truly heal, a transformation that would test their bonds and forge them anew. The following week, David arrived at Sarah and Ethan's home with a heart full of trepidation. Today would be the day he shared stories about Michael. His son, his love, the boy Ethan had been so eager to know. As he pulled into the driveway, anxiety gripped him tight. Would Ethan truly be ready for this? Would he embrace the reality of Michael's life beyond the laughter and seemingly perfect moments depicted in memories? Ethan greeted him at the door, a mixture of excitement and anticipation sparkling in his eyes. Are you ready to tell me about him? He asked eagerly, barely containing the energy that seemed to radiate from him. David nodded, his heart swelling with both pride and sadness at the boy's determination. Let's sit in the backyard. There's something special I want to show you, he said, leading the way. They settled on a weathered bench, the faint scent of lilac swirling about them as spring came alive in the garden. Before I share stories, I want to show you something. From his bag, David pulled out an old leather-bound journal. His journal, filled with memories, sketches, and reflections from his time with Michael. Wow, what is that? Ethan asked, eyes wide with wonder. This belonged to me and your dad. It's full of our adventures, his thoughts, and a lot of love, David replied, a wistful smile appearing on his lips. He gently opened the journal, fingerprints smudged and pages turning almost translucent with age. As he turned to a specific page, he could almost feel the warmth of Michael's smile radiating off the paper. David's voice wavered as he read aloud. "We found the biggest fish at the lake today. Michael caught it all by himself, and we couldn't stop laughing." He glanced over at Ethan, who listened with rapt attention, both apprehension and eagerness written on his face. He loved fishing. "Did you know that?" David asked, looking at Ethan, who shook his head. "Not really. Mom says we don't fish because it's too hard for her," he said, suddenly shy. "What else? What did he do besides fish?" David ran his fingers along the edge of the journal, feeling the weight of nostalgia. "He loved exploring. I took him hiking in the mountains, and he would try to climb every rock he saw. He wouldn't rest until he reached the top, often dragging me along even when I was tired." Ethan's eyes sparkled. "That sounds adventurous." It was. And he could make friends everywhere. David continued to turn pages, sharing snippets of Michael's thoughts on life, dreams, and aspirations, revealing the vibrant soul that had once filled his home with laughter. "Here's one. Today I met a bear. Well, sort of. It was actually a big dog, but I convinced Dad it was a bear. So I'm pretty sure I'm a wildlife expert now." They both laughed, the sound breaking through the tension of the moment. But there was also something bittersweet in Ethan's gaze, a longing to step into these memories that were not entirely his. "What's this?" Ethan asked, suddenly pointing to a half-faded photograph stuck between the pages. David's heart sank as he recognized the picture. A selfie taken during one of their fishing trips, with the sun setting behind them, casting golden hues over their smiling faces. That was the day Michael caught his first fish," David said softly. His voice laced with emotion. He was so proud. And the way he laughed. It was infectious. Ethan turned the photograph over, studying both the bright, carefree smiles and the shadow of an absence that lingered in their eyes. "He looks happy," Ethan murmured, voice tinged with a newfound yearning. He was happy. But life wasn't always easy for him, David continued, aware that this was the moment where innocence collided with reality. As he grew older, he began to face challenges, both at home and in school. "I couldn't always see the signs, and I wish I had been there for him more." "What do you mean?" Ethan asked, his eyebrows furrowing as the burden of David's words settled in their thoughts. Michael struggled with feeling different. He always hit it well, made everyone laugh, but deep down he felt lost sometimes. "He wanted to be perfect to make me proud. But I missed the signs." The heaviness in David's voice echoed like a mournful hymn, threading sadness and regret. "I didn't realize how far he had fallen until it was too late." Ethan's expression shifted from curiosity to concern. Did he ever get help?" David shook his head, a wave of misery washing over him. "In the end, he thought he had to handle it all alone. I wasn't there to guide him, and it cost us dearly. He needed support, love, and encouragement, but he never reached out for it. I wish I could have been a better father. A better friend." Tears welled up in Ethan's eyes. "Is that why you visit them every week? Because you feel bad?" "It's part of it," David admitted, his voice trembling. "But mostly I go because I want to honor his memory. I wish to feel close to him even if he's gone. I do it for him, but now I also do it for you. You deserve a father who is present." As they finished their lunch, Ethan's mind wrestled with the honesty of the afternoon. The shadow of his father had shifted, no longer a frightening ghost but a piece of a puzzle to be acknowledged and accepted. And for the first time, there was hope that he could be different, that the weight of the legacy wouldn't be a curse but rather an inspiration to rise above. In the following days, David helped Sarah set up a little art corner for Ethan. They transformed a small section of the yard into a creative space, complete with paints, easels, and colorful canvases. "Let's paint your story, Ethan," David suggested one Saturday morning. "Let your imagination run wild. You can express all those feelings through colors and art." At first hesitant, Ethan soon found joy in mixing hues and brushing them onto canvas, creating a vibrant swirl of colors that expressed not just his doubts but his dreams. They spent hours laughing and creating, more like friends than father and son, weaving new narratives without forgetting the past that thread their lives together. As summer began its graceful descent into autumn, Ethan invited David to his school's Bring Your Parent Day. David felt a wave of pride and anxiety wash over him. This was a significant step in their relationship. He agreed without hesitation. When the day came, Ethan was a bundle of nerves. "What if the other kids' parents are cooler than you?" he fretted, tying his shoelaces with unnecessary intensity. David chuckled, kneeling to meet the boy's gaze. "Trust me, kiddo, I'm far from the coolest person you'll meet. But I'm your biggest fan." Ethan grinned, his confidence buoyed by David's encouragement. When they arrived at the school, they were welcomed with bright banners and cheerful music. As Ethan led David to his classroom, his heart raced. Would he be accepted? Would others judge him based on whispers he heard or on the absence of a father he never had? But when David walked in, Ethan noticed his peers' faces beam with intrigue. "This is my dad," he declared proudly, even if a little shyly. David knelt down to Ethan's level and smiled, remarking, "I've heard great things about this young artist." As the day progressed, David realized how far they had come, how far he'd come, from the depths of grief and sorrow into a vibrant world filled with new life, laughter, and the hope for redemption. Sharing Michael's stories in a new light had opened doors not just for Ethan, but for himself too, reclaiming his role as a father. But as they headed home that day, Ethan's excited chatter bubbling over, something deep within David prepared for the inevitable moment of truth that lay ahead. A moment where they would address the number hovering over them, the niggling questions still tucked into the corners of their hearts. A week later, they sat on the porch, evening shadows stretching across the yard. David knew it was time. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for what must come next. "Ethan, I think it's important for us to talk about your father again." The boy went still, his face tightening slightly. "What else is there to say? I want you to know that Michael didn't want the things that happened in his life for you. He wanted a future, he wanted you to be happy. The choices he made later on clouded that, but they don't define who you are or who you can be, my boy." Ethan's gaze dropped to the ground, grappling with the weight of dread that still clung to his heart. "But what if I mess up like him? What if I hurt all the people I love?" David shifted closer, all too familiar pain pushing him to act with unwavering love. "Ethan, I can't promise you'll never make mistakes. Everyone does, even me. But that's why you need to have an open heart and surround yourself with those who care for you. Never face the shadows alone. Talk about it. Reach out for help. Be brave enough to lean on others." Looking up, Ethan's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "I don't want to turn out like him. I want to be better." "You can be better," David affirmed, his voice steadied by the depth of conviction. "You already are. You've shown courage just by wanting to confront these feelings. You're writing a new chapter in your life, one that honors your dad but doesn't repeat his mistakes." Tears flowed freely as Ethan openly wept, and David wrapped him in a tight embrace. They shared a moment, the gentleness of a simple connection reminding them both that healing wasn't linear. It wound through peaks and valleys, but together they could find solace in their vulnerability. "I'm scared," Ethan confessed, voice muffled against David's shoulder. "It's okay to be scared. You're allowed to feel everything. But always remember, you're never alone in this." "Not as long as I'm here," David assured him, resolute in his promise. Night descended as they sat on the porch together, the stars illuminating their path ahead. In those moments of shared pain, they inadvertently forged an unbreakable bond, their lives intertwined like the branches overhead, standing firm against the winds of the past, determined to weather whatever storms awaited them. As they silently reflected, David felt an overwhelming sense of hope unfurl within him. They would face future struggles together, coupled with laughter, love, and the legacy of Michael that would not be a haunting shadow, but a whisper of light guiding them forward. Spring would bloom again, autumn leaves would turn, and winter's chill would pass, but the courage they nurtured in each other would stand resilient, forever rooting their hearts in the knowledge that together, they could weather any storm. And thus, they closed the chapter on grief that day but opened another, filled with healing, resilience, and the hopeful promise of a beautiful new beginning.